You can do every trip right for 3 weeks, and the one you do wrong is the only one you're going to hear about. It's just a natural. So for the drivers, so many of you are the front lines of what we do. You're the face of public transit. You're the people that make the day of many of our passengers. It's really great that you're here competing. I hope to see many of you in Omaha at the national conference. On the body on chassis side, I'm the starter. I've started the rodeo for the last 25 years. It's a good chance for me to interact with drivers, so hopefully I will see you there. Also, I had agreed to come and present prior to our board naming one of your own. Todd is now a member of the CTAA Board of Directors. Congratulations. We're happy to have Todd's leadership. And I wanted to make sure I shared that news with you. Also, the crowd, you guys are very diligent. It's very few state association meetings I go to that at 4 o'clock on Friday are still in meeting rooms. So this is impressive. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in DC and try to give you some broader context, but I want to encourage you to ask questions. If I'm talking about stuff that's getting in legislative weeds and what does that mean, fire away. I want to make sure that at the end of this you have a good grounding in what we expect to happen when it comes to the legislative piece that is the funding and the regulatory piece that we all work under. And then at the end of that, I want to talk a little bit about what you can do, because there's such a disconnect now between public policy and the people who are often in the field actually implementing it and making it work. And I want to make sure that you can kind of see ways that you can affect and engage in what happens with your funding levels, with the regulatory burden you're dealing with, and that it's not just things that are happening to you. So we'll start off with just kind of a look at what's kind of happening right now. So every 5 years, all surface transportation policy in the country gets reauthorized. Roads, highways, bridges, rail, transit, all of it. It's all funded out of the gas tax. So all of the folks in your communities, when you pump a gallon of gas, each gallon is taxed by the federal government at 18.6 cents. 80% of that is it all goes into the Highway Trust Fund, but 20% is that set aside for what's called the Mass Transit account. Every 5 years, Congress kind of goes through and says, what are we going to do with all that money? How should it be spent? What are the priorities? That's what's starting now, because our current law expires the end of September 2026, so a year and 2 months, 2 weeks from now. So that's happening. I have worked 7 of these bills over 37 years working in transit policy. They're getting a little ahead of schedule right now, and maybe they'll actually get this one done on time, but the last 5 all were rife with at least 12-month delays. That's Congress. They can't agree that the sun will rise in the east tomorrow, so stuff like this is really hard to get any agreement on. The House is more engaged, which is what we typically see in Washington. House members are elected every 2 years. They hit the ground running, and they are all about action. United States senators are elected every 6 years, and they slow everything down. And that is, they call the Senate the world's greatest deliberative body. So you shouldn't be surprised when I say the House has raced ahead and the Senate is lagging behind right now. We expect to see the House bill by the end of the calendar year. Now, I don't think it will pass by the end of the calendar year, in fact, but I think they're going to announce the bill. We also expect to see the Trump administration introduce its priorities for reauthorization. I'm hearing from folks next 2 weeks. And the last few presidents' authorization bills, literally no one cared what was in them. I would often have to go and follow somebody from FTA who would come to a meeting like this and would say, here's what's going to happen in the president's proposal. And then you'd kind of have to follow up and say, Congress will not do any of that. But I do think, given the nature of the Congress right now, the president's ideas will have currency and more than we've seen recently. So we're paying attention. What else is going on? FTA, I think you're well aware, the Federal Transit Administration is going through a significant staff reduction and a reorganization. How that will affect you, if you hear nothing else today, if folks here from the state DOT, we've got to obligate. When we get awards, we can't wait 2 years to obligate those unobligated grants. This administration will rescind because they will think you don't need it. And I'm not familiar with exactly where you guys were in your schedules, but I've been visiting a lot of states where, a state I was visiting in July, they had like a $30 million bus award through 5339 that was being held up. And I've worked with a lot of our members on how to get through the grant being held up, and we were working through that. And then they said, well, it's an FY22 grant. And I was like, oh, why is it 3 years later and this hasn't been obligated yet? You don't want to be in that position. So that's an important piece. Appropes, we were talking earlier about authorizations. Every 5 years, every year, the House and the Senate appropriate money in line with that authorization. We've got a House and a Senate bill that are done. We fully expect that nothing will happen because all these bills are supposed to be done by the end of this month when the federal fiscal year ends. I think they're going to run into some sort of at least a 3-month CR to start off with, and they probably won't pass any of this stuff until we get into 2027, which, that's also been their MO recently. So, as we're talking about the reauthorization, one reason that we're seeing the House move quickly is because the chairman of the T&I committee, Congressman Graves from Missouri, actually petitioned the United States Congress to allow him a second term as chair of the committee because he wants to be chairman when this bill goes through. So he is motivated to get this done in this Congress. And he's a good guy. He likes public transit. We've got a good working relationship with him. We were happy to see it. He understands that there's transit outside of the 25 largest cities in the country. So he's been a good person to work with. The House is gonna run, and they're gonna run quickly. In the Senate, they don't have a transportation committee. The Environment and Public Works Committee does the highway title. The Senate Banking Committee does the transit title, and the Senate Commerce Committee comes up with the money. Maybe that's why it takes them so long. So we work with the Senate Banking Committee of all groups and do a lot of work with them. They're underway. The highway title's moving a little quicker. I talked about the administration proposal and And to give you a little inside on kind of how Congress works, these are, you know, these 5-year bills are like $300 billion bills. These are massive, 2,000 pages of legislation. These are big movers. When they finally get a bill done, one of the things they always write into the bill is, over the 5 years, it's going to spend down all the money in the trust fund. The rationale is that will bring the next group to the table because there'll be no highway money for any state DOTs around the country. That'll bring everyone to the table to, in a timely manner, get the next bill done. So, some of us who really don't have anything better to do with our time, me, look at what's the spend down look like. The interesting piece is, because interest rates have been so high, there's more money in the trust fund than they anticipated. And what was supposed to go to zero in September of 2026 looks like it will go to zero in Q1 of 2027. The cynical person who works with the government a lot tells me that's when we'll see this bill, because they have to do something at that point. That's kind of a reality check. What is CTAA, and what is our board, and what are our members, on behalf of you, what are we trying to inject into this? One, we're saying continue to invest in public transit. Public transit should continue to get the 20% of what comes out into the trust fund. That's an important piece to be saying right now. Second, it looks boring there, a consistent federal share for operating assistance. For rural systems in the room, for the state DOT, we are asking that operating match go to 80-20 instead of 50-50. We just see so many places where that 50 is really hard to come up with, and we want to try to stretch these dollars more. We like working with states where we can really point to, particularly in the rural side, kind of a 4-to-1 ROI. If you put state money in, that $1 leverages 4 federal dollars. Most of the states that we work with, virtually all of them are supportive of this. AASHTO is supportive of this. Interestingly, somebody from the Trump administration called me earlier this week and they said, would you be okay if we included in our proposal, which is a good sign, but we would also want a maintenance of effort piece so that states can't reduce their funding by 30% since they only need to come up with 20% to match now instead of 50. And I said, yeah, sure, that's a great idea. The purpose of this isn't to reduce funding. Second one, and I'll have another slide on this, our members have been telling us for a long time that the regulatory burden in public transit is too high, that most smaller agencies who are CTA's members don't have the administrative capacity to deal with all of the data collection. All of you who, I think you know those pieces that drive you crazy. We could talk for the next hour about how much you hate the NTD, but it's Friday afternoon and we're all in a good mood. But I'll go through that. For the small urbans in the room, we have been very supportive, and small urbans are urban areas between 50 and 200,000 population in their urbanized areas. They have the ability to hit performance targets and get more money. And I think that is going to be a move we're going to see the administration pushing, is performance. So understand, typically smaller agencies do really well in the performance metrics. We kind of embrace that. We want to increase that in the stick. And then we just see so many of the small urbans, rurals, the 5310s in the room, running old equipment. And you're running old equipment because you don't have capital dollars. So one of the things that we want in the Section 5339 program, which is the bus program, is double the set aside for every state DOT from 4 million to 8 million, so that we can start to recapitalize and get new vehicles into lots of communities. We see the backlog. We know how far many of you are slipping behind on a state of good repair. We're trying to come up with some funds to fix that. So here's the specific regulatory targets. The first one I really want to point you to, because systems that are state managed, any of you who are subrecipients to the Utah DOT, you have a higher regulatory burden than the New York City MTA, because they get their money directly. They have a set of federal regulations to deal with. The smaller ones have state and federal regulations to deal with. So one of the things we're saying is states should pick one and stick with it, but it shouldn't be double jeopardy for the smallest agencies. We want to streamline the NTD process. The best way I can tell you, the new FTA administrator, he said, I hear a lot of negative stuff about this. Explain it to me. And I said, okay. CTAA has a member in Morgantown, West Virginia, college town. The NTD people doing their data processing ask 5 times, back and forth 5 times, why does your ridership dip in June and July? Same ridership pattern that Mountain Line in Morgantown, West Virginia has had for its entire history. It's serving a college community. Of course the ridership goes down. And I said to the administrator, I said, we don't mind answering that question once. But the 5th time, we begin to wonder what's going on. And I could give him chapter and verse from, and you probably all have your own stories. So, and the real thing is, if you're in a city over 200,000, what you report to the NTD directly results in your funding. Your ridership, UTA's ridership, absolutely and directly impacts the funds that it gets through the Section 5307 program. The rural ridership across this state has no bearing at all on 5311 funding. 5311 funds are sent to states based on census data and nothing else. So why are we giving this back and forth on ridership when it doesn't even matter? Now, so I think there's certain data points we should be reporting. And frankly, ridership's one of them. But it should just be simpler. Small urbans in the room. None of your ridership matters in your 5307 allocation. If you look into that formula, small urban is all based on population and population density. 1 million rides, you get this money. 10 rides, you get the same amount of money. So, it's like I was just saying to the administrator, like, why are we driving ourselves crazy with this stuff? Buy America, it seems to be the only thing in Congress that the Republicans and the Democrats agree on, is that Buy America is important, and we don't disagree with that. But its implementation is so awful. And it ends up all of our vehicles costing way more than they need to cost. And it creates all of this red tape. So we're trying to come up with some ways to simplify that. For instance, when Utah DOT goes to buy buses, or any of you go to buy buses, you have to look and you have to say, yes, it's gone through Altoona. It's done the Altoona test. And you can look on a list and see, has it? Yes. Okay, we can use federal funds to buy that vehicle. Why can't they do that for Buy America? Have a set list. If you buy this vehicle with this basic setup, it already meets Buy America. We don't need to pre-audit. We don't need to post-audit. It's on the list. So I know we're trying to inject common sense in a town not known for much of that. I know that's what you're all thinking. We're trying to do some stuff on CDL. The environmental laws are insane, and we're trying to work on those. If any of you want to buy property in transit, you have to do the environmentals prior to acquiring the property, which means the property is going to cost you 20 or 30% above market, and it's going to take a lot longer. And if you have a really interested seller, they're going to find somebody else. We see this time and again with our members. Federal Highway Administration, you can buy first and then do the environmentals. So we're simply saying, us too. Used bus sales, risk-based oversight, similar pieces. I was talking about FTA. They've lost about 30%. I think they could probably have another 10%, unfortunately, to go. And there's been a lot of really good people that have been let go, that are the kind of, again, I'll editorialize here, the kind of public servants we should all want. And so, again, understand that you're dealing with an agency whose capacity is dramatically reduced. They're going to need more time to process grants. We've got a lot of members out there that are giving us regular reporting on how long it takes to process at FTA reimbursement requests because we're concerned. And some of the regions, this one included, really took a hit. The new FTA administrator, I wouldn't come here and tell you that he and I are best friends, but I've gone in and met with him a couple times. He came to our conference that we had in Minnesota a month ago, and I spent a lot of time with him that day. I think you would like him. Every time I talk to him about transit, safety, accessibility, he wants to talk a lot about universal design. And I'm not talking out of school because he says this publicly in other meetings I've been in. He has a child with a disability who relies on transit. He understands the value of the work we do. I was really heartened to hear, I think Todd was in the room in Minnesota, when one of our members was talking about trying to get their ridership back to 2019. And the administrator said, I'm not interested in that. Our goal should not be trying to recreate what we were 6 years ago. Our goal should be, I'm more interested in where you're going to be in 2026 and what's your post-pandemic trends look like. And how are you changing your service, which we'll talk about. And when he left, he was like, how did I do? And I was like, you need to say that everywhere you go. People need to hear that. I think he's going to be, I don't know. Now, he's running FTA out of New York. He's decided he doesn't even want to come down to D.C. So I don't know. He's a former congressman. I don't know. I don't think he's in this for the long haul necessarily. I don't know. But while he's doing this work, I think we have a good partner. I talked a little bit about the appropriations. The House bill cuts transit more than the Senate bill, but the House bill's cuts are focused on capital investment grants, which we don't like, but I'll talk about in a second, and a lot of heavy rail. The programs that most CTAA members rely on, 5307, 5310, 5311, they're all growing in the House and the Senate budgets by about 2.5%, which, given what's been happening in DC, is a lot better than a kick in the mouth. CIG gets targeted every cycle because it doesn't come out of the trust fund. Years ago, they removed the CIG program and had it be coming out of the general fund, which was like, let's paint a bullseye on this program as the one for budget hawks to cut. I thought it was a bad idea at the time. I think it still is. So we're working on reauthorization. We're working on a rural transit bill with the banking committee, and we're working on STIC, that. A couple things for you to all think about. What do you like better? Do you like formula funds better, or do you like discretionary funds better? Everyone's different. Right now, there's this kind of rush on the industry to be like, I kind of like formula because I can count on it, and I am hearing from even the more aggressive Republicans in the House that they don't want to cut formula funds. The problem is in the bus program. $1.5 billion put on the table every year in discretionary funds. If we change that to formula, the top 30 transit systems in the country are going to take 70 to 80% of that money right off the top. And if you look at over the last 5 years in the discretionary program, actual results, you'll see rural and small urban much greater than the formula provides. So I ask you, as you're thinking through that, try not to only think about it from the perspective of, I'm scared about all the chaos I'm hearing in DC. The biggest systems are going through a really rough go with the fiscal cliff right now. We've got Philadelphia just cut 40% of its service, so they restored a lot of it this week by raiding their state capital budgets, which is probably not a real good idea long term, but it allows them to keep their service whole for another 2 years. Chicago's running a $500 million annual operating deficit. Yeah. And you can say, and I get it, how can that be? When you lose 20% of your ridership and you need the fare box recovery, and if those 20% are 150, 200,000 people a day, each spending $7 or $8, and you start stacking those days, and now it's years, that's how you get there. But there's no federal cavalry running to the rescue. Those folks.
I'm sorry, I really want to understand. It's a lost revenue that they're claiming, so it's not really that they owe on expenses. It's lost revenue.
It's like it costs this much, and you all know with inflation, it costs 20-25% more every year just to operate your systems. And you combine those increases with most of the operating funding, or a good chunk of it in these big cities, coming out of what people are paying in fares. And so you're losing that. On a daily basis, you're losing $100,000 in expected fare revenue for 4 years. You get to this. They ask me, members of Congress will say, well, how come, Scott, your systems don't have these huge deficits? And I said, well, smaller agencies will cut service. We can't run deficits. But that's not the way they run. Now, I don't represent them. And right now I'm kind of really glad about that. Because it's going to be a tough fight. Like New York City is whole right now because of that congestion tax, the congestion corridor tax that they imposed. The administration wants that to be gone. But if that goes, then the biggest transit mouth to feed suddenly is going to be super hungry. And, you know, like, I work for rural and smaller systems, but 1 out of 4 transit trips that happen in this country today happen in New York City. 1 out of 4. 23 point something %. Yeah, it's, you know, 5-6 million trips a day. So if they fall into that, that cycle will be massive. So we're all watching that and trying to figure out if they come up with like, and this Congress won't. We'll see what happens in the elections in the fall of 26. But I just kind of monitor that to see if there's going to be some sort of federal rescue, then we want something in the smaller space too. Bus capital is moving. States that are sanctuary states are having a real tough go right now. There's 21 states that the administration is threatening to just not give them any money, any transit money, because they have this policy. You know, I'm not sure that's going to end up in, that is in the courts, and that will end up in the Supreme Court. And I talked about rescissions and such. So what can you do? I've thrown a lot at you. A lot of stuff's happening right now. Some of the stuff I'm saying, you're probably like, yeah, I like that. Some of the, you're like, oh boy, that sounds scary. But one of the first things I always tell our members you can do is just do your job. Provide your service safely, cost-effective. Keep doing what you do in your communities. That's the biggest message to drive home on the most important thing you can do. Focus on that. I know you had a state elected official in earlier today. That's great. You need to tell your story to everyone. Doesn't matter the party. Even if they don't like what you have to say, I don't want them to be able to say, I never heard from transit. And you got to talk about that in certain ways, which we talk about. And you need to stay up to date because things are moving. Things are moving quickly. So, you know, provide your service. A big piece, the FTA is very interested all of a sudden, there goes my mic, in customer evaluations. What does the community think of your service? Knowing who your customers are, knowing who in the community is going to be more important than ever. If your goal as a transit for the directors and the managers in the room is to never change, you're going to have a problem. You've got to figure out ways to adapt new technologies, to innovate, to look at ridership patterns and changes in your community and evolve your services. I want to stress that. You got to focus on outcomes. You all can tell me how many trips you did last week, last month, last year. But you need to be able to talk about what happened from those trips. I'll preface this because I know some of us do have people that just ride buses because they like to ride the buses. But for the most part, people who are riding your vehicles are doing so to do something. You need to know what that something is. You need to be able to evaluate it, talk about it in economic terms, in healthcare terms. It's not enough where we're headed to only know the consumption of your service. You've got to know its real value in the community, and we'll be happy to work with you on ways to do that. I talked about getting back to pre-COVID. And you got to look for, particularly with this group, if you have private sector contracts that you work with, push those forward. They're going to like those. All the elected officials need to be hearing these stories. The people who benefit from your service that aren't riders need to be hearing these stories, and they need to be data-driven. And where you can match up solid data with the human stories that I know you all have, and where you can make those messages coexist, that's your gold. You all have these, but you got to now work on them. We were putting together, and it said, I visit systems all over the country. I have colleagues in the office who do the same. And we kind of sat down for a few days recently, and we were like, the ones that are really crushing it, what do we see? What are those common elements? Because we should be sharing this with everybody. So this is kind of what we see. Don't take this as gospel or that this is the entirety. But where we see systems that are really not adjunct, but in the community, that everyone kind of knows what that bus is. You know that when you're there. When we see leaders who are thinking about more than next week or even next year, but that have longer range plans for rural services just like urban. Whether it be building a facility or launching new service or all these things. The crises we've gone through, managing, having operators in vehicles has not been the easiest part, and it's kind of hard to do our business without those two things. So those systems that are on top of that, as back to the changing again, that they've developed good, effective relationships with local elected officials. So they know what you do. So they know when one of their voters calls and says, I need to get my mom to dialysis, they know to call you. And you're an answer for them. They have, and this is a hard one, staff that can do the technical pieces. Particularly for the rurals, I see a lot of places where you've purchased software and you're using 5% of its power because you just don't have people to do it. We're working on some things to help with that. That technical capacity, though, our business is getting a lot more technical. I think it's been like 3 or 4 years since I visited a member that was still working with rubber bands and index cards. And it's keeping up with that, hiring, training, which I'm really happy to hear all the training you've been doing and you're committing to. Those are very important right now. And they have good and productive work with their boards. They're not at war with their boards. They are getting good engagement and leadership from their boards. That's kind of what we see. You could probably add some to that as well. So before we go into Q&A, our expo's coming up next May in Omaha. Coming up sooner than that in March, we're going to have our Hill Day, the Leadership Academy. You've sent people to both of those in the past. Thank you. Continue to. And along with the combined period in DC where we do the Hill Day and the Leadership Academy, we're working up some sort of kind of managers summit so that we can take advantage of while everyone's there and kind of have you, L'Oreal and my team, she's just about nailed it all down, but something that we can get a bunch of managers in the room and you can talk to each other and brainstorm, because there was something I learned when I was in journalism school, which was that used to be a job. I don't know if you knew that. you're only as original as the obscurity of your source. In our business, it's all kind of been done, but the great thing about our business is we share. When something works, we're all too eager to share that with somebody else. Nobody keeps these things to themselves. Getting a bunch of folks in the room can help with that. And then that's me, that's my email and my cell phone. Call, text. If you want this presentation, I think the association has it. I'm happy to send it out to everybody. Or if you want a copy, I can send it to you. But more importantly, if you've got success stories you think I need to hear about, please call. I'd love to hear. If you've got challenges outside of what I was talking about, where you might be like, there's this other regulation I wish you guys were working on, let me know. We can work on those things. It's hard to do that when we don't know it's driving you crazy. And with that, any questions? Todd?
So you talked about regulatory reform, and I love the things that you're pointing to. It seems like this administration seems like they do want to do that. What's the likelihood that we're actually going to see some real regulatory reform?
We will. The rub is going to be getting the words right. We all know what we want to see, and we kind of all know it when we see it, but I've been doing this long enough to know that if you just leave it up to Congress, they'll write things and it gets worse. Their attempts to solve things oftentimes make it worse. So that's the biggest worry I have now. Everyone seems to be engaged around, we get it. It's too much. We need to reduce things. But how literally that gets done is where we can hopefully, like with this rural transit bill, they sent us the legislative text before they put the bill out. Then we can dive in and say, no, that you don't work with transit agencies, that won't work, and fix things. I remember I learned this lesson. We had a bill that was for systems with fewer than 50 buses, this regulatory relief happened. I worked on this in like the early 2000s. And then I started getting half of our members weren't getting the benefit. And then I looked at the bill and I talked to FTA, and the congressional implementation said, well, those members of yours have 0 buses, so they don't get it. It's only people with fewer than 50. And to them, I was like, are we really talking about 0 not being a number? And the answer was yes, we were talking about that and we had to fix it. So I learned my lesson the hard way in that one, that the implementation, it's like a 2-part. Getting everybody teed up so they see the problem, and then kind of riding herd over the implementation of the fix so it actually will fix something and it won't make other things worse. But yeah, I think the administration wants it, Congress wants it, the field wants it, AASHTO, CTAA, APTA, we're all pushing. It's just a question of what it will look like and hopefully how much time it will free up for you to actually do the work of providing trips instead of being red tape processors.
About how many eyes are on those drafts before they go to the
I don't know for sure. When they share it with me, you never know. Like, it's rare that your relationship is good enough where it's only coming to you.
Right. Well,
So,
is there a committee essentially so that you can collaborate and vet the ideas?
yeah,
Grow one
there's like
individual reading?
people doing what I do at other organizations representing smaller cities and representing state DOTs. We all kind of dig in on it and try to tear it apart, and so yeah, it's not just us. Yeah. I wouldn't like that responsibility. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
You already mentioned with these discretionary grants that the discussion between going more to formula, less to discretionary. And as part of the AASHTO steering committee with transit, there are a lot of states that are excited about the chance of more formula funds. But what we have seen is we have such a large rural population that without those discretionary, where there's been a lot of focus on helping rural communities, that could make a real hardship on some of these areas because we don't have enough formula to do buses, that they really rely on those. So what do you see, what direction do you see?
So right now, the bus program is like 75% discretionary, 25% formula. APTA's initial request, and what I saw was like, flip that. 75% formula, 25% discretionary. We, the Bus Coalition and others are saying it's got to stay at least 50-50. The thing you learn in DC is people will talk about formulas like they are science and that they were handed down along with tablets thousands of years ago and we must follow these. But if you really look at them, they're political instruments. They are typically mathematical formulas that get the output that the people putting them together want. That's what they are. So when they were talking about 80% going into the formula or 75%, I said, well, why do we have to pick the 5307 formula? Because I know how that one was created. Why don't we pick, let's create a formula that is based on what happened the last 10 years in discretionary. Because that'll be more in line. You see those things and you know what they are. And never trust when folks from DC, because I've had them come to meet with our members and they say things like, I don't want to talk to you about what's in the formulas because it's too complicated. You wouldn't understand it. That's a cop-out. Yeah, we had somebody do that once. That was the last time they ever presented at any of our stuff. Yeah, we're smart enough to figure out numbers. But I think that's 50-50 the way it's going to go. Yes, sir.
Is there a way to influence cutaway bus manufacturers? It seems like our buses have doubled in cost.
Yeah.
And have gotten crappier by the year.
Yep.
And there's no, it seems like the manufacturers are consolidating.
Big time.
And so there's less choice.
Yes.
And there's not a purpose-built, specialized bus out there.
True.
And so there's this struggle, right, where we're feeling like we're being fleeced for our buses.
Yeah, they've gone from like $90,000 to $190,000 in 4 years.
Yep.
Yeah, it's insane.
Is there any way for us to influence that? You know, you ask about discretionary grants, and you know, there's all this money that goes out, and then we want to customize a bus, and it just seems like there's a lot of inefficiencies, and there's not the quality, and yet there's this customization. And I think if we could get a middle ground where we could get some quality, we would give up some customization if there was something out there that would meet our needs. And it's like this vacuum.
Give me a card, because I met with Forest River this week. I'm meeting with the Mid-Sized Bus Manufacturers Association the first week of October. And what you're saying is exactly what we're trying to bring to the table. We've got lots of systems that have over-customized their buses. And the manufacturers are using that as a rationale for part of these massive price escalations. Now, in January, I went out and toured Forest River, who makes a large majority of cutaways. And it was interesting. They had just moved somebody over from RVs, private sector RVs, which, by the way, is where Forest River makes most of its money, to commercial bus. And he told me, when I came to commercial bus, I was sure that there's going to be way more customization in a private sector RV purchase. And he's like, I couldn't have been more wrong. There is vastly more customization in our buses. When I was there, we were walking down the line and there was a bus maybe where the windows are, and the person giving the tour said, that bus is going to Michigan. And I said, how do you know that from here? I said, those taillights, we have to stock because Michigan specs them. They're the only one that specs them. They cost more, they're hard to get, they delay when we deliver buses to Michigan. So I listened, and happened to be like 2 or 3 weeks later coming to DC, Michigan DOT, and like 6 or 7 rural systems. So I raised the idea of these taillights. Every one of them said, we do? And I think that speaks to part of the issue. We have over-customized, and we've got to get to 80% of a bus being standardized so they can mass produce it at a more reasonable cost. But I said to Forest River this week, we can't go along with this if we don't see the cost come down. If we go through a standardization process and reworking on specs and everything just keeps climbing 20%, why are we going to do it? So they're talking to us. We're engaging with them. I'm looking for ideas. The consolidation of the industry is scary, particularly for the small vehicles, also for the big buses. I mean, you got 2 people building big buses, and a company that is really aligned with Forest River, a group called Lippert, just bought Friedman Seating. You might have heard of them. They also bought Transair. So the largest seating and the largest HVAC are now all kind of lining up. It worries me because it will lead to, lower choices and the inability for us to buy things. There's not enough competition to lower the price. It's an inefficient market, right? So is the big buses. If you want to buy, if you're UTA and you want to buy a 40-foot hydrogen fuel cell bus, there's one manufacturer that can make it. Who, by the way, is a Canadian company and is not exactly having a great financial time right now to begin with. So that whole piece, in 37 years, I've never seen it like this. And the result is we pay more for worse, and we gotta reverse that. If you can figure out how, just shoot me an email. Yes.
Do we have any control about, could we have any more control about the types of vehicles that we're eligible to receive through the TVM list? Could that be the one that could indicate the reasonableness of cost?
Yes.
I don't know what the parameters are for them being allowed to be on the TVM list, because that really directs what we can purchase, right?
It does, and every state does that a little different. Okay. But if you're a rural and you'd like to see a vehicle that you don't have access to, you need to be talking to your folks at the state DOT to say, hey, how can this get on the list? And they're going to look and see whether or not you're allowed to use federal funds on the bus and some other things. There are people moving into the space. Look, the problem we have is, and I'm not revealing anything you all didn't already know, but we had an administration that went all in on zero emission technologies and got a lot of that started. And I argued with them endlessly that they were going down the wrong path. Now we've got a new administration who is just as crazy, but on the other side. And we need something in the middle, and we need, you need to execute these kinds of capital plans over 5 and 10 years. And we've got an attention span in DC of 18 months. It's a real problem. And the bigger the agency gets, the bigger the transition, the longer. I did not agree with the Biden administration, and I was unhappy that I was right. But we just kept testifying in front of Congress saying, let local communities decide what works best for them. Rurals can't, a 90-mile range doesn't work in rural Utah, and it never will. But there are other low-emission technologies that work really well. So let's just bring some common sense and let you folks who know your operating environments, who know your budgets, let you guys work that out. That fell on a lot of deaf ears for about 4 years.
Hey Scott, can you touch on Karen's training programs and how they can help?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Justin. I appreciate the reminder. I loved seeing in your program the past trainers. We're super excited that like Wednesday we put live Pass 8. We've been working on that for almost a year. All of you who are certified, we'll have like at least 4 options for you to get certified in Pass 8. If those don't work with you, let me know, but we want to get you starting to move that way. That's a huge training, but we've got certifications, everything from manager to vehicle maintenance. People don't know that about CTAA. We train about 5,000 transit folks a month between all the programs we do. Karen Souza, our training director, and her team are like very busy people. It's a very, and what I like to hear from also via email is, are there things that we're not offering that you'd like to see us offer? I saw some of the trainings you guys are doing are really great. De-escalation, perfect thing to be training right now. We have some programs. I'm sure what you got here locally was great. But all those kinds of things, that commitment to training at each of your agencies is really important. Now more than ever. Thanks, Justin. Well, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you.